We're on Daf Ayin Gimel, and we're up to the third line down from the top of the Amud, quoting the Mishnah, Shchato Shaloli Ochlav. And the Mishnah says that if Yudalid B'Nisan coincides with Shabbos, and he shechted the Korban Pesach for the purpose of a Zaken or a Chole who is not capable of eating a Kazayas Basar of the Korban Pesach, in such a case, the Pesach is possible, and it doesn't override the Shabbos, and therefore he's going to be chayv chatos for violating the Shabbos. And the Gemara asks Pshita. We know from the Mishnah in Talmud Nishchat, back on Daf Samach Aleph, Keva the Hasam Asul, the Mishnah establishes explicitly that if you shech the Pesach, Shaloli Ochlav, meaning for the sake of someone who's not capable, or a group of people are not capable of achil, the korban is possible. And therefore, hacha chayav, in this case where it was Shabbos, then for sure he's chayav because he was machal Shabbat, shalom b'mokum mitzvah. So the Gemara answers, mishum detanas seifa. The only reason why the Mishnah had to mention here the case of shchato shaloli ochlav, that he's chayav achatos, is as an introduction to the seifa. And the seifa is a case where the korban is indeed kosher because he shechted it li ochlav vi shaloli ochlav. For both ochlim, those who are capable of eating the korban pesach, and for the sake of those who are incapable. And in such a case, the korban is kosher, and therefore he's patur. Is therefore Tanarei Shachayav. He tells you, in contrast to the seifa, where the korban is kosher because it was li ochlav vi shaloli ochlav, he tells you that if it's chato shaloli ochlav, it's possible, and therefore he's chayav a chatos on Shabbos. Or says hanami pshita. And what are you telling me that he has to introduce the seifa, which he needs, in the case of li ochlav shaloli ochlav? That's also pshita. That also doesn't bear repetition. Mishum dahasam kosher in Perek Talmud Nishchat. The Mishnah establishes that a Pesach that was shechted both liochlav and shalol liochlav is kosher. Is memela, I understand if the korban is kosher, hach in the case of Shabbos, patur. There's no rhyme or reason to think that he might be chayav. That's the Gemara's question. Ella, but rather the Gemara says the following. Let me give you a different answer. Aidi the Tani, since at the beginning of the Mishnah it says shchatot shalol shmo b'Shabbos chayav, Tananami shaloli ochlav. In other words, the Mishnah really wanted to explain that if you had a korban pesach and you shechted it l'shem shlomim, that means for the sake of another tzevach, and you were oker the shem pesach. In such a case, the pesach is possible because pesach sheshchato shalol l'shma is possible, and therefore he's chayav achatos in the case of an overlap between Yudalit and Shabbos. Is now the Mishnah mentions the next din of somebody who shechts it shalol liochlav, and the truth is that all the psulim that are mentioned here, we have a case of Shalom Nuyav, we have a case of L'Shem Arelim, L'Shem Tmeim, and also Liochlav V'Shalom Liochlav. All this is agav, is really something that we don't need in the Mishnah, but it's mentioned agav. And Shalom Liochlav and Shalom Liochlav, Limnuyav, Shalom Limnuyav, Limulim, L'Arelim. In other words, when he had a double kavana, and he had both a kavana for Shalom Liochlav or Shalom Limnuyav, but at the same time he had in mind Liochlav, Limnuyav, and Limulim, then the korban is kosher. Of course, he's parted from a chatos. So the Gemara asks, Vaha vehi gufa lamali. We already have back on Daf Pesachim and Beis that in the case of shchato shalol lishmo, the korban is possible. Maybe I understand that if it's possible, then he's chayv achatos on Shabbos. Why did the Mishnah feel compelled to repeat that which is obvious? And the Gemara answers, Mishum de Kabai lifluge, because the Mishnah wants to present the debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. So the case of Shchato Shalo L'Shmo is the case where even Rabbi Yeshua, we've cleared the path for Rabbi Yeshua to argue against Rabbi Eliezer, because in this case of Shalo L'Shmo, even Rabbi Yeshua agrees that the carbon is possible, and he had no justification in shechting a carbon Pesach for the sake of a shlomim on Erev Pesach. I mean, everything that's in front of him is designated for and as a carbon Pesach. Why did he shech l'shem shlomim? And in such a case, Pesach shelo l'shma, the carbon is possible and b'meili is chayav chatos. But where does Rabbi Yeshua disagree with Rabbi Eliezer and exempt him from a chatos? That's in a case where he took a carbon shlomim that happened to be in the Azara on Erev Pesach, and he shechted it, mistakenly thinking, like all the other lambs in the Azara, that it was a carbon Pesach. And that, according to Rabbi Yeshua, is called a toeh b'dvar mitzvah. As a result of the fact that he was preoccupied with the mitzvah of carbon Pesach, he thought that this lamb, which was really, in fact, a shlomim, was a carbon Pesach. And according to Rabbi Yeshua, in such a case, you're not chayv chatos. And therefore, the Mishnah opens up by telling me that if he changes the carbon from a Pesach to a shlomim, and he shechts a Pesach l'shem shlomim, that's called shinui l'davar asur. And there's no justification, there's no ones here or toeh. He's really a shogeg and he's chayv chatos, and that introduces the seifa where he was meshana l'davar mutter, and he thought that shlomim was a carbon Pesach, and Rabbi Yeshua says your point. Now, the Mishnah tells us different scenarios in which the carbon is possible, and he's chayv chatos, so he violates Shabbos. And what is the violation of Shabbos? If you check out the list of 39 malachas, you will identify shchita. Shchita is one of the 39 malachas. And therefore, in this context, we understand why is chayv chatos. However, and I say this by way of introduction, chatos is only for what's called a meleches tikun. We have a principle that underlies all of meleches Shabbos, which is called meleches machsheves. We require a significant melacha that adds something and benefits the world. And if it's not a benefit for the world, that's called a kilkel. And a makalkel is pot. Now, there may be one or two exceptions to that rule. There may be two malachas on the list of 39, about which we have a debate in the Gemara whether or not the ptur of makalkel applies. One of those two that has a debate is a questionable twilight zone case, is meleches netilas neshama, or otherwise known as chovel. So when you cause a wound to someone and you draw his blood, that is a destructive act. And yet, according to one opinion, Mekalkel b'chabura is chayav. And the normal universal ptur of Mekalkel doesn't apply to Meleches Chabura, because by its very nature, drawing blood is destructive to a live being. However, our Gemara here that we're about to learn reflects the Shita that the ptur of Mekalkel that applies to the other 38 Melechas applies as well to Meleches Chabura. Now, in this case where he shechs the carbon Pesach and the Pesach is possible, to what extent can we say that the Shechita was in any sense beneficial and constructive? The Gemara says, Amalei Rav Huna Brei Drechanina Lebrei Ki Azos Lekami Rav Zrika. Boy, Mine, when you get a chance and you find yourself in the presence of Rav Zrika, please ask him the following question that presses my mind. L'divrei Omer, according to the one man Diyoma, in Masechta Shabbos Kufa, Mekalkel Mechabura Patur, that the same ptur of Mekalkel that applies to all other malachas applies to even Meleches Chabura, Meleches Chovel, and therefore you're not going to be chayav on for Chaval on Shabbos unless it was a tikkun. Now he shechts a carbon, shaloli achlav, shchatol shaloli achlav, and the Mishnah says chayav ma tikkun. Where's the tikkun over here? On the contrary, he passed the carbon, and now you're not allowed to eat the carbon. So what did you gain by doing the shechita? And if you didn't gain anything, it's a meleches makalkel. And the Gemara answers, Tikain, there is a takana. Now, this takana we can only understand according to another introduction. That's a Gemara in Zvachim Pei Dalet, called Im Alu Lo Yerdu. That if you have a carbon that is possible, and they took the emurim of the carbon mistakenly, they placed it on the mizbeach, possibly even on the kevish of the mizbeach. And you're not allowed to do such a thing, but b'di'evet, if you did such a thing, then we have a principle called im alu lo yerdu, that even though the carbon is possible, but it had some sort of inherent hegdesh status, and although it was disqualified as a carbon, we are not going to take it down from the mizbeach. We will, in fact, burn the emurim on the eish because im alu lo yerdu. So we see from this that the shechita of a carbon, even though it was shaloli achlav, and therefore it was possible, nevertheless, it still brought this carbon into a potential state where we actually will be makayim a mitzvah of haktar seimurim. Again, that haktar seimurim of im alu lo yerdu is not exactly what you'd call the hakrava, the carbon. It's a separate hakrava, but it has a kiyum mitzvah, and we will be maktir, we will be soref the emurim on the mizbeach because of alu, and that became possible as a result of the shechita. Even in this case of shachta shalol. Gemara says, okay, you've gotten away with the case of shchato shalol because there we apply the principle of im alu lo yerdu. But the principle of im alu lo yerdu is a limited principle, and it would not apply in the case of balmum. So the Gemara asks Rav Zrika, the Mishnah says shchato v'nimtza balmum. He shechted the carbon Pesach on Shabbos. Yudalid was on Shabbos. And lo and behold, they investigate the animal. They find out the animal is a balmum. The carbon is possible. And the Mishnah says he's chayav achatos. Apparently, there was some element of negligence on his part. He should have checked it out before he shechted it to make sure it's not a balmum. And therefore, shogeg b'melecha Shabbos is chayav. But here, in this case of a balmum, the halacha is im alu yerdu. We cannot allow any haktara of the emurim of a carbon that's a balmum, even if he accidentally took those emurim and put them on the mizbech, he's got to take them down. There's no haktara, in which case the shechita is purely kilkul. There is no benefit or upgrade whatsoever as a result of the shechita. Now, why? In the case of a balmum, does the principle of im alu yerdu apply as opposed to im alu lo yerdu? And this is based on a principle formulated in Masechtas Zvachim, kol shepsula b'kodesh, hakodesh makablo. That if you took a carbon into the azara, and at that point the carbon was kosher, at some point within the azara, a psul occurred, that's called psulo bakodesh, meaning the psul occurred bakodesh, meaning in the azara. And then the kodesh makablam, then the kodesh sort of grasps onto this carbon in such a way that im alu lo yerdu, if the emurim were brought on the marach al gav hamizbeach, then lo yerdu. However, in the case of a balmum, that's not called psula bakodesh. The psul was not a result of anything that happened in the azara. The carbon was possible. The behema was a balas mum. And here the halach is im alu lo yerdu. Im alu yerdu. You have to take it down. There's no kiyum akrava whatsoever. So what benefit did you have from the shechita such that it generates a carbon chatos? Now the Gemara introduces the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. What is the sheet of Rabbi Akiva? Tikein bidukim sheba'ain. There are two types or categories of mumim that both passel the carbon, that's for sure, but one of them is on a lower level than the other according to Rabbi Akiva. which is the lower level of mum. That's a what's called bedukim. Bedukim is miloshan dak. Dak means it's something that's very, very subtle. It's not something that's obvious. So if you have an obvious mum, that is im olu yerdu. You have to get it down from the mizbech at all costs. But if it's a mum dak, for example, there is a cornea that surrounds the eye. That's called krum ena. And if we find that there's some malfunction, so to speak, some mum in the krum that covers the eye of this animal, maybe this animal has cataract, needs surgery, I don't know. But in such a case, I'll leave it to Rabbi Akiva, the Omer Olu Lo Yerd, that this carbon, despite the fact that it's a balmum, nevertheless, as we said before, it's a lower level of balmum, and therefore the halacha is in Olu Lo Yerd. That's the case of the Mishnah that says, according to Mandiyoma, that Mekalkel B'Chavur is potter, that if we find the animal to be a balmum, he's chayav achatos. We have another question to ask Rabbi Zrika. But if he shechted on Shabbos, the Korban Pesach, and him says treifa, is now it depends. Baseiser potur, but begolui chayav. If there was a puncture in one of the internal organs in such a way that he couldn't have found that out until after the shechita. So in such a case, he's not in any way negligent. He did what he could, due diligence. He checked out the animal. How would he guess that it's a treifa b'makom seiser? So therefore, he's considered like ones, not a shogeg, and he's parted from a chatas begolui. But if there's an obvious, recognizable treifa, and he should have noticed it, then he's chayav. He's a shogeg. He's unintentional, but yet there's an element of negligence. He cannot claim onus. Now he shechted the animal, and it turns out to be a treifa b'makom seiser. He's potter, but b'makom golu he's chayav. What do you mean he's chayav? Matiken. What did he accomplish with this shechita? A treifa is not what you call psulo bakodesh. It didn't become possible in the azara. The psul of the treifa of the tarfus was inherent in the animal before it was brought into the azara, and therefore the halacha is im olu yerdu. So what takana, what benefit does he get as a result of the shechita? And the Gemara answers, tikain lahotzi midei nevela. The halacha is that shechita has two parts to it. One part is in terms of the avoda, the karban, or in the case of chulin, to be matu the basar. But there's another aspect and dimension to shechita, and that is it's mitayer es habehema midei nevela. That if an animal dies without shechita, its basar, its carcass is mitabi b'nevela. It's a tumah chamura, and now the carcass is not going to convey tumah because of this shechita. So that makes the shechita somewhat of a tikkun, and all we need is one element of a tikkun, and that makes it into a Molechet Shabbos. Maskif la Ravina, we still have a question to ask. Hadesad, you have a brisa. Hashochet chatos b'Shabbos b'chutz li'avodas ora. A person, he piled up 3 averos at once. He shechted a korban chatos on Shabbos, so he has a violation of Molechet Shabbos. Not only that, he did it outside the azara. So when you take a korban chatos and you shecht it outside the azara, you're chayav for shchut echut. And number 3, he shechted it l'shem avodah zarah. Again, I have to tell you, Rabbi say it always bothered my mind how you could have a case of a shogeg that he shechted l'shem avodah zarah. I don't know. He must have been a total amoritz, meaning he had no background whatsoever. Although he did know shechita apparently, but he didn't know that you're not allowed to shech for the purpose of avodah zarah. More likely, it means that he didn't realize. I don't know. It's hard for me to work this out. In any event, he now has to bring chayv sholosh chatos. He violated 3 chilulei kares, averos sheyesh mem kares b'mezid. Number one, chol Shabbos. Number two, shchitas chutz, and number three, avodah zarah. Now, the law of avodah zarah is that number one, it's cherem, it's aser b'ana, and number two, it has the status of tuma, of a tuma chamura. It is even metami be oil. Imagine the only thing we know about tumas oil is in case of a mess, but also avodah zarah could be metami be oil. What do we benefit from this shechita that he's chayiv? One of the three chatos is for shechita and violating the Shabbos. It's pure kilkul. He wasn't matu the basar. He wasn't mitarit midei nevela because it was the shem akum. Amar Avavira, this is a pretty radical Gemara. Shemotzio midei ever minachai. As long as the animal's alive, a ben noach, although he's not enjoined to eat something that was dedicated for avodah zarah, and certainly not shchutei chutz, but he's enjoined from eating this, let's say, an organ of the animal when the animal's alive. As a result of shchita, the animal is dead, and there's no iser ever minachai in a dead animal. So again, he could have taken a gun and shot the animal between the eyes, and the animal died. I mean, that also would remove the Yisur Eivim and Achai for Ben Noach. But instead, he shechted the animal. That was one of any method that he could have used to kill the animal. But once the animal is dead, there's no Eivim and Achai. That itself makes it into a Meleches Tik. That now, as far as the Ben Noach is concerned, he's allowed to eat the basar, which while the animal was alive, he could not pluck off a flegel and eat it. Okay. Now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses a case where he shechted the Korban Pesach, and then after the shechita, he finds out that this was a shechita shelo l'shem bailav shelo l'shem ochlo. For example, moshchu abailam es yedeim o mesu. The owners of this Korban Pesach removed themselves from the registration, and they registered with a different Korban Pesach. Or never the owners of the Pesach died, and he didn't know this at the time of the shechita. The third possibility, says the Mishnah, nitma'u, if let's say the Bailu became tmeim, such that they can't eat the korban. In all these cases, since the shochet had no clue, and we cannot hold him responsible to begin to know or entertain the possibility that the Bailam decided to move on to a different korban after they already registered on this korban. Or never that the Bailam died, he had, there was no, he didn't get a message on his telephone that the Bailam died. So in all these cases, when he went ahead and he shechted the korban, which is exactly what we would have told him to do, he's pot. Okay, now we have this case in our Mishnah of a Korban Pesach, and there were Bnei Chabura that registered on the Pesach. They were all royal la'achila, and then after the shechita, he finds out, as we said before, that they were no longer registered on the korban, or they couldn't eat the korban because they became tmeim. Now the Gemara wants to know, what is the status of this korban? Again, if the shechita was with a machshava poseles, that's not our case. For example, if he shechted shaloli ochlav or shaloli nuyav, then for sure the korban is completely possible. And that's a Mishnah later, a Mishnah that we had earlier on Daf Samach Al. And l'chora, we can compare our case where, although he was shechting bershus, unknown to him was the fact that it was shaloli ochlav or shalom nuyav, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, the shechita was a shechita shaloli ochlav shalom nuyav, and the korban is possible. However, the Gemara raises the following possibility, that maybe in this case, what we could do is we could say that since the shechita was in a sense legitimate, let's call this korban a korban shlomit. Instead of calling it a korban pesach as it was designated, now that there's no money on this korban pesach, and whoever had designated the korban pesach for his own is now no longer in this world, or he contracted tumor. In all these cases, we should perhaps redesignate the carbon. And instead of being a carbon Pesach, it should now receive the designation as a carbon Shlom. That's always the fallback position for a carbon Pesach. It becomes a carbon Shlom. The only problem is that if you want to change and transform this shame carbon from that of a Pesach to that of a Shlomim, l'chora, you might need an agent to do such a thing. The shochet should have had in mind that he's shechting l'shem Shlomim. That would be considered an akira, where he changes the designation and the shame carbon. In this case, he had no clue, the shochet, that there was any reason to change it to a Shlomim. In his mind, naively, he thought it was a perfect carbon Pesach. But is there a halacha of akira me'ela, that in such a case that the carbon no longer could serve in its original capacity and achieve its original purpose, then automatically it gets redirected towards another carbon? And what's going to happen is that in this case, the carbon might, and that's a possibility which the Gemara is going to investigate, become automatically Ois Pesach, no longer carbon Pesach, it becomes a carbon Shlom. The Gemara has another issue that we're going to address here, and that is, if a carbon became possible, do we immediately burn it, or do we wait until after what we call lina, after it's allotted time for achila, and then that's called ibur tzurasam. We'll explain that as we go along, and then we'll burn it only later on. Now, again, that second issue is only relevant on Chol. I mean, certainly it has no bearing on Shabbos. If Yudalit B'Nisan is on Shabbos, we're not going to violate the Shabbos simply for the sake of Sreifas Carbon Apostle. But during the weekday, it's a real issue. Now, our sugya that we're about to embark upon, the sugya of Rav Huna in the name of Rav, with regard to a carbon asham, is also related to this question that we just formulated about akira. If the carbon doesn't serve and cannot serve its original purpose, can it automatically, even without an active akira, become redirected and take on a new shame carbon? So just like in the case of a carbon Pesach, that now there are no menuyim, or no one who is an ochel on the carbon because it's they're all tmeim, does the carbon automatically, even without an akira in an active sense, become redirected as a carbon shlomim? And Omer Rav Huna Rav, we have the same issue in the case of a carbon asham. Now, what was the case of a carbon asham? He's chayiv an asham, right? There are 5 different categories of ashamos, and then he dies before they brought the carbon asham. Or, alternatively, instead of the fact that he died, he brought a different carbon asham, perhaps unintentionally, and he no longer needs the kapara of the first carbon asham. So here's a case where a carbon was designated as an asham, but it no longer could serve its function, either because mesu bailov, and now the shliach is taking care of the carbon, or a case where he himself is alive and well, the bailei asham, but he already brought a different carbon as an asham. So Rav says, nitak l'ra'iyah. Okay, that's a very complicated concept. I think what I'm going to do for a moment of time, with your permission, I'm going to skip nitak l'ra'iyah. We'll get back to it in just a minute. But what's more important to us is shchato stam. Underline that word stam. Kosher li'ola. Because this carbon asham is no longer fit for its original purpose, as it was sanctified as an asham, it becomes a carbon ola. And the emphasis here is on the word stam. He did not do an act of akira and declare, I want this carbon, I'm shechting it as an ola. It automatically becomes an ola. And that's because Rav holds lo boy akira, that when a carbon loses its original purpose, it doesn't need akira, it automatically fits into a different category. Alma, we see from Rav, Kasavar, he holds, lo boy akira. You don't need to set up this carbon, and now I'm checking it in Zuman for the sake of an ola. It automatically becomes a carbon ola. No, it's just like in carbon Pesach, the fallback position. If it cannot be a Pesach, becomes shlomim. So too, in a case of a carbon asham, its fallback position is a carbon ola. And if it can no longer serve as an asham, Rav is of the opinion that it becomes a carbon ola. If he checked it, even stam, without redirecting it through an akira, it is now a carbon ola. So the Gemara says, if that's what Rav holds, kilo nitak nami. Now we get back to those two words that I deliberately skipped over before, nitak l're'iyah. What does that mean, nitak l're'iyah? Re'iyah is miloshen roa, a shepherd. And what we do is we send this carbon asham after its bailim died, or after they set up another kapar with another carbon to replace this one, and we give it over to the shepherd. Why is the shepherd so important? The Lord is my shepherd, but why is the shepherd so important? Beis Din will appoint a shepherd. For what purpose? They will make a declaration, the Beis Din, that this carbon can no longer serve as an asham, and therefore we have to wait until what's called Yira Achi Yistai V'Yipol Bo Mum. Let the shepherd bring him into a grazing area. There are nails on the floor, and the asham, the behemoth is gonna swallow a nail until it becomes a balmum, and then afterwards we'll do what's called a pigeon. We'll sell it on the open market, and we'll take those dumim and we'll buy a carbon ola. Now, if Rav holds lo boy akira, once the bailim died of this asham. By the way, I'm just to shorten things. I'm not going to repeat every time all the different scenarios. I'm just going to mention the bailim died. But again, the point is that the asham can no longer achieve its goal. So Rav holds now, even if you shecht it stam, it becomes a carbon ola. So why did you have to wait for Beis Din to send it out to the pasture land to become a balmum? Who needs that? And the Gemara answers, Gzeira, this is all the Rabbanon. Li'achar kapara atu lifnei kapara. If we're going to allow him to, in this particular case, where he already had a kapara for this asham, in other words, he doesn't need the asham, and we're going to allow him to shecht it as a carbon ola without any notification, then in another occasion, he may take a carbon asham and shecht it as an ola. He thinks you're allowed to take a carbon asham and shecht it as an ola, which you're not allowed to do. You're only allowed to do it in a case where there was an akira mi'elav, where there was an automatic akira because mesu bailav, etc. So this exer the rabbanon, because lifnei kapara, you're not allowed to shecht the asham as a carbon ola, but if you allow him liachar kapara, then he might mistakenly do it even lifnei kapara in a case where he needs the asham for a kapara. Umina temra. And what's the basis? Where is there a source for this gzeira? Can you prove it to me? Tisnan, we learned in the Mishnah, now we're learning a Mishnah in Tamura. Asham shemesu bailov. Ocean is kapru bailov. So the asham no longer will serve its purpose. Is yireh achi yistaev. Beis Din will appoint a roa to take this animal, this asham, and wait till a mum falls on it, and then then we'll sell it and we'll use the money that we sell, which now that we've transferred the kedushas asham onto these mos, and we'll use these mos now to buy a carbon ola, which is called an olas nidava. And this, by the way, introduces another concept which we're not going to get into today, called Ketzam Mizbeach. And this is the opinion of Tanakama. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, in that Mishnah in Tamura, Yamus, because Rabbi Eliezer has a Gzeret Shava between Karban Asham and Karban Chatos. And in the case of Karban Chatos, we have a Halacha Moshe Sinai that there are what's called chamesh chatos mesos, that there are 5 chatos which we have to let the animal die, and one of them is called mesu baleh. Or another category is chatos and kapru baleh. He brought a different carbon as a chatos. He no longer needs the kapar of this chatos, and the halacha Moshe Viside says that the animal has to die. And the same is going to apply to an asham, according to Rabbi Eliezer, in the light of his equation between asham and chatos. Rabbi Yeshua Omer yimacher v'yavi b'damav ola. Again, we're going to do the sirad shistayev. We wait till a boom, and then we sell it, and we buy an olas yachid with the funds that we got for this mechira. Now the Gemara analyzes the words of Rabbi Yeshua. B'damav in. What we do is we take the carbon asham, we sell it, and we use its damim to buy a carbon ola. Aval gufo lo. Apparently, we're not going to take the carbon itself that was sanctified as a carbon asham and bring it as a carbon ola. We can only get its damim after it became a balmum and use its damim. And the Gemara wants to know, why is this so? Well, why do we have to wait until damav with the whole rigmarole? Why not just take the carbon and shecht it as a carbon ola? Ella, we have no choice but to say the gazar liachar kapara atu lifnei kapara. We're afraid that if we allow him to shech the asham as an ola in a case of liachar kapara, where he already achieved a kapara, he brought a different carbon asham instead, then we have to be afraid that he might already shech the carbon asham as an ola. Let's say, for example, he has an obligation to bring a carbon ola, and he has an asham, so he says, what's the difference? I'll shecht it as a carbon asham, as a carbon oil, but he's not allowed to do that. It's a carbon asham. Ishmami, no, we see clearly that there is such a gzeh.